take a deep, full breath and let it fade out naturally. Find a position where your body can rest without effort, lying down, wrapped in softness, or simply sitting still. Each morning, a door opens to new possibility, but most days we rush past it, chasing the future before it arrives. The Buddha discovered that suffering begins in that chase, and that peace appears when we finally stop and notice that the door was never closed. Dawn, in Buddhist tradition, is more than light. It's awareness itself returning. If you'd like, share the time and place where you're listening from, or how your heart feels right now in this moment of pause. Let the next breath come on its own, effortless and real. The story now begins. The forest lay still beneath the afternoon sun, warm and golden, its edges softened by the hush of tall grass and the rustle of distant leaves. Along a winding riverbank, deer moved like whispers, elegant, careful, serene. They drank from the clear water, nibbled the green shoots, and lifted their heads with ears poised to catch the smallest sound. Among them walked a deer, unlike the others. Tall, golden brown, with a coat that shimmered like silk, and eyes that held not fear, but understanding. He was the Buddha in a life long before his final birth. And he was known as the king of the banyan deer. In this forest, two great herds lived side by side, the banyan deer and the branch deer. Each herd had its king, but only one ruled with wisdom and mercy. The king of the banyan deer cared for his herd as a father cares for his children. He ensured the weakest were protected. He shared shade and water with all. And when conflict stirred, he calmed it with reason, never violence. But far beyond the forest, beyond even the river's reach, sat a palace of polished stone. There lived a human king, powerful, proud, and enamored with the hunt. He loved the thrill of the chase, the cries of hounds, the clatter of hooves, the fall of the body. But he grew tired of riding so far for the kill. And so one day he declared, "Let the deer be driven into the royal park. I will hunt them there at my leisure." His men rode into the forest, scattering the herds. Mothers called for fawns. Hooves pounded through brush and mud, and by force, fear and fire, hundreds of deer were herded into the park's high-walled grounds. The king of the banyan deer and the king of the branch deer were among them. The hunt began. Each day, the human king would enter the park and fire his arrows. The deer ran. Many fell. The others huddled in dread, knowing not who would die next. So the two deer kings came together. "This cannot go on," said the banyan deer. "Too many suffer. Too many die. There must be a way to spare the herd greater agony." The branch deer narrowed his eyes. "You would deal with the hunter?" "No," said the banyan deer. "I would speak to the man." That night, while the moon hung low and silent, the banyan deer stood at the gates of the palace. The guards laughed at first until they saw his eyes. They led him in, and the next morning, the king, amused by the boldness of the creature, agreed to listen. "You are brave to come," he said, "but also foolish. Speak, and I may spare you, or I may make a rug of your hide." The deer bowed his head, not in fear, but in respect. "My lord," he said calmly, "your arrows fall without pattern. The deer live in terror. Let there be order. Each day we will offer one deer willingly. No chase, no cruelty. Just one life, given so the rest may live without panic." The court gasped. The king blinked. "You would offer your own kind?" "To save many, yes." The king, impressed by this wisdom, agreed. And so it was that each day, one deer came forward, chosen in turn, first from the branch deer, then from the banyan deer. There was no fleeing, no screaming, only quiet surrender. But one morning, the chosen deer did not come. Instead, a young doe, trembling thin, appeared at the palace gate, her eyes wide with grief. "My lord," she whispered, bowing low, "today was my husband's turn, but I have just birthed a fawn. If I die today, it will surely perish." She wept softly. "Please, let me live just a little longer. Let someone else take my place. Let me nurse it just until it walks." The king said nothing. He looked at his ministers, at his guards, at the doe, crouched low and shaking. Then he said, "No, the order is the order. You must go." The deer turned her head to hide her sobs. But before the guards could move, a shadow stepped into the courtyard. Tall, still, golden, the king of the banyan deer. "I will take her place," he said. The king frowned. "But it is not your turn. She is from the branch deer herd." "I do not care," said the banyan deer. "A life is a life, and compassion does not ask about herd or rank." The court fell silent. The deer turned to the doe and lowered his head. "Go, raise your child." The human king stood, his face unreadable. "You would die for one not your own, for one you do not even know." "Yes," the deer said, "because I do know her. She is like me. She feels fear. She loves her child, and I will not let her weep alone." The king sat back down slowly. No one spoke. And then, with a deep breath, he looked to the sky above. What kind of creature gives his life for another? The deer said simply, "One who understands that all life is the same." The king rose. "No more," he said. "No more killing. No more hunting. Not here. Not in the park. Not in the forest." He turned to his court. "Let the gates be opened. Let them go free." And so it was. The deer returned to the wild. The herds rejoined. The mother nursed her child beneath the whispering trees. And the king of the banyan deer stood once more at the edge of the river, watching, not for enemies, but for peace. In time, the story spread, told around fires, carved into temple walls, painted in soft colors across ancient scrolls. And always it bore the same lesson. To speak truth to power is rare. To speak with compassion is rarer still. But to do both without fear, even to your own risk, that is the mark of true nobility. Even in a deer, even in a forest, even when the one you face holds arrows and gold. Because courage is not always loud. Sometimes it bows low. Sometimes it says, "Let me go instead." And sometimes it changes the heart of a king. She never meant harm. She only passed on what she heard. A whispered comment here, a raised eyebrow there, A half-finished sentence passed along like a secret prayer. Her name was Sister Nima, young, lively, kind mostly, but her words moved quickly and quietly unraveled the thread of trust inside the temple. At first, it was small. She meditates longer when people are watching. They say the head cook isn't really vegetarian. I heard the abbot used to be married. No malice, just conversation, just sharing. But soon, monks began to turn away from each other in the corridor. Silent meals grew tenser. Chanting lost its rhythm. Smiles stiffened at the edges. No one named the cause, but it lingered, like smoke with no fire. One afternoon, the abbot asked Sister Nima to join him in the garden. The plum trees were beginning to blossom, delicate petals stirring in the breeze. He held a small bag in his hand. "Walk with me," he said gently. They walked in silence down the path that circled the temple grounds. After a while, he opened the bag and began to scatter chicken feathers along the way. Sister Nima tilted her head. "Why are you doing that?" The abbot didn't answer. When they returned to the garden, he handed her the empty bag. "Now," he said, "go and collect them all." She blinked. "But the wind's taken them. They're scattered everywhere." He looked at her and said softly, "So too with your words." That night she wept. This is the story of speech and consequence, of how sound can build or destroy. Commentary. In Buddhist practice, right speech is one of the Eightfold Path's pillars. It sounds simple, but it is one of the hardest, because words don't vanish when we stop speaking. They ripple, they stain. They take root in someone else's mind, sometimes forever. Sister Nima did not speak with cruelty, but neither did she speak with care. And in that space, in the absence of intention, harm took hold. We often forget how powerful language is. A word can lift someone from despair or push them over the edge. It can invite reflection or ignite shame. Words are not just air. They are actions. They build worlds. There's a Zen saying, "Speak only if it improves upon the silence." Sister Nima filled silence with curiosity, suspicion, drama, and the silence grew quieter, but colder, until no one trusted what they didn't hear. The Buddha once said, "A person is not wise because they speak much. A person is wise when they speak what is true and what causes no harm." That is the gate of right speech. Is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? If it fails even one, it's better to let it drift away like a feather on the wind. After that night, Sister Nima changed. She stopped repeating what others said. She listened more, spoke less. When she did speak, her words came slowly, like water poured from a clean bowl. The monks began to look at her differently, not because she had become wise overnight, but because she was watching herself now, watching what she left behind in others when she spoke. And over time, trust returned to the temple. Not because of a sermon, not because of a rule, but because one person saw the feathers scatter and chose to stop scattering more. So speak with care. Speak like you're building something with your breath. Because you are. Every sentence is a seed. And whether it blooms or bruises is up to you. There was once a long road that passed through deserts, cliffs, and shadowed valleys. Many travelers set out on it, seeking peace, safety, or home. But the road was hard. Sun beat down like flame. Rocks cut the soles of their feet. Wind stole their breath and sand filled their eyes. They grew tired, weary, ready to turn back. Some sat by the wayside, too exhausted to move. Others began to whisper, "Perhaps the road is endless. Perhaps we were fools to begin. Perhaps this path leads nowhere." And then they saw it. Up ahead, a city. Walls shining, gates wide, flags fluttering in breeze. A place of refuge, a place to rest. Hope stirred again. They stood, ran, cheered. Inside there were cool fountains, fresh food, gentle beds. They were safe. At last. But when they awoke the next morning, the city was gone. No walls, no gates, no fountains, only the long road ahead. And a single voice from the air. This city was an illusion, a resting place created to help you continue. Now rise and go on. This is the parable of the illusion city from the Lotus Sutra. It is a story about skillful means, the power of compassionate illusion used to awaken real strength. The city was not a lie. It was a gift, a temporary truth, a form of mercy shaped to meet exhausted minds. The Buddha is the one who created the city, not because he needed it, but because we did. Because the path is long, and sometimes we need to believe we've arrived before we can realize we haven't. In the parable, the travelers are like us. We start spiritual practice with high hopes. We read, we meditate, we strive, but somewhere along the way, we get tired. The progress feels slow. The suffering still returns. We wonder, is this working? Am I really changing? And then, suddenly, we have an insight, a moment of peace, a breakthrough. It feels like we've reached something final. We name it, we hold it, we build a city around it. But the next day, it's gone. And that's when the Buddha's voice speaks. That peace was real, but it was not the end. You rested. Now continue. The illusion city is not deception. It is timing. It is compassion shaped like form. It is a way of saying, this isn't the end, but it's enough for now. Imagine a parent on a long hike with a child. The child tires and cries. So the parent says, just a little farther, there's a surprise ahead. And when they reach a clearing, the child sees a snack, a blanket, a resting place. Later, the child learns there's still more to walk, but they are stronger now, because the kindness made them believe again. That is the illusion city. A fiction that leads to truth, a rest that becomes fuel, a stop that is not a trap. In the West, we're taught to distrust illusions, to strip away comfort, to seek truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. But Mahayana Buddhism teaches that skillful means are also sacred, that sometimes what we need is more important than what is absolute. There's a saying, only a fool tells a drowning man, there is no water. A wise teacher offers a hand, even if it's through illusion, even if it's temporary. Because awakening does not demand perfection, It demands presence. It demands we continue. There's another layer to the story. The travelers who believed in the city, they were not punished. They were grateful because that illusion saved them. And when it disappeared, they did not despair. They trusted the voice. They stood up and walked again. Commentary. We all have illusion cities, moments of insight we think will last forever, people we thought would never leave, practices we swore would fix everything. Then life shifts, and the walls disappear. We panic, but the Buddha whispers, "Keep going." The path doesn't end at comfort. It passes through it and beyond it, because what we're looking for is not safety. It's liberation, not a stopping place, but the end of stopping altogether. But here's the paradox. Without the illusion city, we might never find the strength to walk again. And that's why it's not a mistake. It's a skillful gift. One Zen teacher put it this way: enlightenment is real, but the first one you find is not the last. Celebrate it, thank it, then let it go. Even the Dharma itself is a raft. Even the Buddha himself once said, "If my words help you, use them. If they do not, leave them behind." The illusion city teaches us not to cling, not even to the things that save us, because truth moves, and we must move with it. One traveler asked the Buddha, "How will I know I've reached the end?" And the Buddha smiled. "When there is no more need to ask. Until then, let the cities come and go. Let the rests be real, even if they're brief. And when they vanish, bow to them, thank them. Then stand up and walk again." As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a tale about recognition and the true nature of worth. This is the next story. Before time was measured by stars, before mountains were named, before the sutras had been spoken, there was a vow. A single vow, whispered not to the heavens, but to the suffering of the world. "I will not enter nirvana until all beings are free." This was the vow of Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion, not a god, not a savior, but a being who heard the cries of the world and stayed. In Sanskrit, his name means the one who hears the sounds of the world. In China, he is Guanyin, the one who listens. In Tibet, Chenrezig, the gentle-eyed protector. In Japan, Kannon, the goddess with a gaze like soft rain. He takes many forms: male, female, neither, all, because compassion is not bound by gender. It is a response, a presence, a hand that reaches out before the mind decides whether or not to help. The story begins long ago in the celestial realms where Avalokiteshvara practiced deeply and tirelessly. Lifetime after lifetime, he worked to free beings from suffering. He taught, he healed, he carried, he wept, and still the suffering did not end. Every time a life was soothed, 10 more were in pain. Every time one was saved, another was lost. One day, Avalokiteshvara stood at the edge of reality and looked down upon the world. He heard every cry, every mother losing a child, every man begging for bread, every animal caught in a trap, every being trapped in anger, desire, confusion. And in that moment, his heart broke. Not figuratively, it shattered. His body split into pieces, his head burst into 11 parts. His arms cracked and fell. His vow seemed too vast, the pain of others too great. And from the silence that followed, he wept. "I have failed," he whispered. "I cannot save them all." But the universe listens in strange ways, and just as Avalokiteshvara reached the edge of despair, a light appeared. Amida Buddha, the Buddha of infinite light, came forth, gently, patiently, lovingly. He gathered the pieces. He said nothing of failure, only this: "You broke not from weakness, but because your compassion was real." And with a soft breath, Amida blessed Avalokiteshvara's broken form and transformed it. Now he had 11 heads to see in every direction and 1,000 arms, each with an eye in its palm to both see and act. Hands that could reach into every corner of the world. Hands that could soothe, protect, feed, carry, hold, mend. Not all hands were soft. Some held weapons to cut through illusion. Others held lotus flowers to cradle the broken. Some formed mudras of peace. Others reached out with empty palms. Each hand was compassion expressed. Each hand was love in action. This is why Avalokiteshvara did not abandon the world, because even in despair, he did not turn away. Because real compassion isn't about success. It's about showing up again and again, even when it seems hopeless. Especially when it seems hopeless. There's a story told in temples. A monk once asked a master, "What is Avalokiteshvara doing with so many arms and eyes?" The master replied, "It's like a man reaching for a pillow in the night. He does it without thinking." That is the heart of compassion. No calculation, no pride, just the instinct to help. Because suffering is not theoretical. It is immediate, and so compassion must be too. In the iconography, each hand of Avalokiteshvara holds a symbol. A wheel, a bell, a jewel, a book, a rope, a vajra, a bowl, a tear. Because compassion wears many forms. Sometimes it's guidance, sometimes it's protection, sometimes it's nourishment, sometimes it's just being with someone who is grieving without fixing it. In one form, Avalokiteshvara appears with only 2 hands. One holds a lotus, symbol of purity rising from the mud. The other holds a vase, pouring the nectar of healing into the world. Because even with just 2 hands, if moved by compassion, you can save lives. In the Mahayana tradition, to walk the Bodhisattva path is to walk in Avalokiteshvara's footsteps, to take the vow, not for glory, not for escape, but for others, for the one crying next door, for the stranger across the world, for the part of yourself still in pain. There's a saying, when compassion truly arises, there is no I helping you, only the act itself. That is Avalokiteshvara. Not a being to worship, but a mirror, a reminder of what you already are. When you listen with your whole body, when you act before being asked, when you feel another's pain like your own and still choose to love, you become one of the 1,000 hands. Commentary. This story is not mythology, it's instruction. You may not have 1,000 arms, but you have one. You may not have an eye in every palm, but you have awareness, and that is enough. Avalokiteshvara broke not from weakness, but from caring too much, and instead of being punished for it, he was expanded. His brokenness became his beauty. His sorrow became his vow. So if you ever feel too tender for this world, if you feel like your heart breaks too easily, you are not broken. You are awakening. You are listening. You are already walking the path of Avalokiteshvara. In a small temple nestled between pine trees and fog, there burned a single candle. It was placed each morning in the center of the meditation hall. No glass shield, no tall holder, just a quiet flame in a shallow dish. It flickered gently as monks came and went. It was not large, not dazzling, but it was always there. Software steady, alive. One morning, a gust of wind swept through the open window. The flame bent low, danced wildly, then steadied, then bent again. A novice sitting nearby grew anxious. He reached to close the window, but the old teacher touched his arm and whispered, "Wait, let it breathe." The flame, though small, did not go out. It fluttered, dimmed, but held on. The room stayed still, and after a few moments the wind passed. The candle straightened, its glow calm once more. The teacher turned to the novice and said, "This is your mind. This is your breath. This is your life." A candle by nature is vulnerable. One sharp breath, and it's gone. One careless movement, and it's lost. But that fragility is also its power, because the candle doesn't resist the wind. It doesn't fight to stay lit. It simply responds, bows, sways, returns. In Buddhism, the flame is often used as a metaphor for consciousness, flickering, ever-changing, not a solid thing, but a process, a dance between wick, wax, and air. Your thoughts are like the flame, your body, the wick, your breath, the air that sustains it, and the wind. That's life. The candle cannot control the wind, but it learns to dance with it. And that is the teaching. The novice asked, "But what if the flame goes out?" The teacher smiled. "Then we light it again, and again, and again. This is the practice. You will lose your calm. You will be shaken. Your light will dim, but the wick is still there. The wax remains. You are never without the capacity to be rekindled. There is a Tibetan saying, 'Better to light a single candle than to curse the darkness.' But even deeper is this. Learn to trust the candle even when the wind rises." In the days that followed, the novice watched the flame more closely. He began to notice how it moved, how it bent without fear, how it never clung to its shape from a moment before. And one morning, during Zazen, as a storm passed outside, he did not flinch. He simply watched the flame bend and return. And in that moment, something in him softened too. This is what meditation teaches, not how to still the wind, but how to let the flame bend without going out, how to meet life's changes with grace, how to stop fearing your own flicker. Grief is a wind, so is joy, so is anger, so is love. You cannot block the breeze without also losing the air you need to burn. You must stay open, even when it stings. Especially then, commentary. The Candle and the Wind is not a story about fragility alone. It's about resilience without resistance. It's about remaining warm, soft and lit, even when the conditions shift, even when nothing stays steady but your own willingness to begin again. We often think strength looks like staying the same, but sometimes strength is in swaying, in letting go, in trusting that the flame inside you is not so easily put out. You do not need to burn like a bonfire. You only need to glow enough to see your next step, to offer light to the person beside you, to remind the darkness, I am still here. The teacher once said, "A candle gives all it has, and still the world is warmed by its passing. So be the candle. Even if your light flickers, even if no one sees, even if the wind blows harder tomorrow, burn anyway, not for show, but because this is who you are." There was once a wealthy man who lived in a great house. The house was vast, with many rooms, winding corridors, tall beams and ancient wood. But it was old and dry, and one day it caught fire. Smoke slipped beneath the doors, flames curled along the rafters, the walls creaked with heat, and the embers began to rise. Inside the house were his children, dozens of them, laughing, playing, unaware. He called out to them from the courtyard, "Come out, the house is burning." But the children only blinked. The house was all they had known. It was familiar, full of games and colours and corners to hide. They did not see the danger. They did not feel the urgency. They went on playing. The man's heart pounded. The flames licked closer. If he shouted again, they might ignore him. If he ran in to fetch them, the structure might collapse. So instead, he tried something else. He called out again, not with panic, but with a new offer. "Children, come outside. There are carts waiting for you. Goat carts, deer carts, ox carts, pulled by beautiful animals adorned with bells and gold. Come now, and they are yours." The children stopped, looked up, and ran out of the burning house in delight. Safe, laughing, alive. But when they reached the courtyard, there were no goat carts or deer carts. Only one great cart, drawn by a white ox, sturdy, wide, strong, more magnificent than they could have imagined. And the father, calm now, relieved, invited each child onto the cart. It would carry them far from danger. It would hold them safely. This is the parable of the burning house, one of the most famous teachings in the Lotus Sutra. It is not about deception. It is about skillful means, what Mahayana Buddhism calls upaya. It is about the wisdom to speak not with rigid truth, but with compassion shaped to the listener's heart. The father in the story is the Buddha. The burning house is samsara, the world of illusion, suffering, impermanence. The children are us, unaware, absorbed in our games, our distractions, our beliefs that everything is fine. And the carts? They are the paths, the ways we are called out of delusion. Sometimes we need promises. Sometimes we need symbols. Sometimes we come to practice seeking peace, or healing, or clarity. These may not be ultimate truth, but they are ways out of the fire. And the Buddha, seeing this, offers whatever will work, not to lie, but to save. Truth is not always about telling the whole thing at once. Sometimes it's about offering a step forward, a thread through the smoke, a voice that reaches someone where they are, not where they should be. There is a famous Mahayana saying, "The Dharma is like a raft, used to cross the river, but once across, you don't carry the raft on your back. In the same way, the Buddha does not cling to doctrines. He uses teachings as tools and discards them when they no longer serve. In the story, the children are not punished for believing in goat carts, because the Buddha is not interested in being right. He is interested in awakening, and if it takes a golden bell or a beautiful cart to bring someone to safety, then so be it, because wisdom without compassion is incomplete. Sometimes we do the same. We come to practice for small reasons. We want to breathe better, to sleep more easily, to escape stress, but slowly, something shifts. The real ox cart arrives. The deeper teachings come. We begin to see the house for what it is. We begin to wake up, not just from the flames, but from the idea that we ever truly belonged inside them. This story teaches us about timing, about patience, about knowing that not every truth needs to be told at once, and that helping others awaken is not about shouting, "The house is on fire." It's about seeing what they hear, what they fear, what they love, and then speaking to that. The Buddha could have thundered teachings from the sky. He could have demanded obedience. Instead, he walked with people, listened, adapted, and then gave them the vehicle they were ready for. Some criticize this parable. They say, wasn't it a lie? But what matters is the result. The children were safe, and the vehicle they received was not lesser, but greater. They were drawn to joy, but found liberation. Sometimes a mother tells a child there are stars hiding behind the clouds, not to mislead, but to soothe. And the stars are there. Sometimes a doctor gives medicine sweetened with honey, because healing must be palatable, not just potent. And so too with the Dharma, it meets us where we are, and leads us to where we didn't even know we could go. The burning house is this world, not because the world is evil, but because it cannot last. Everything inside it, pleasure, power, possession, even identity, will one day fall. But the Buddha doesn't shame us for being inside. He simply calls us out, however he can. You may be on a goat cart path now, or waiting by the door, or still deep inside the house, holding on to something you love. It's okay. You are seen, and when you're ready, there will be a voice, and a cart, and a way through the smoke. As we move deeper into the quiet teachings of Zen, we come to a story about seeing clearly and understanding true value. Listen carefully to the next story. She had heard hundreds of stories. Pain layered on pain, grief knotted with shame, rage disguised as silence. Dr. Anjali Mehta was a seasoned therapist, 47 years old, calm voice, warm eyes, a room filled with soft lamps, quiet bookshelves, and a single blue armchair that caught the afternoon light just so. She had learned over time that her work was not to fix people, but to witness them, to hold space, to wait, to not flinch when the truth arrived. That afternoon, her 2 p.m. client sat stiffly. Teenage boy, 17. Sleeves pulled over his hands, a stare that hovered somewhere behind her shoulder. He didn't speak for the first 8 minutes. She didn't force it. She just sat, breathing gently, grounded, present. When he finally did speak, it was one sentence. "Everyone talks like they know what I'm feeling. They don't." She didn't nod too quickly, didn't say, "I understand." Instead, she let silence do what words often can't. "There's a saying in Zen," she offered softly, "that the teacher is like a mirror. They don't speak for you. They just show you where the dust has gathered." The boy blinked, looked at her, and, for the first time in weeks, said something more. There is a deep wisdom in the pause, the moment between a question and an answer, the breath between emotion and reaction, the silence that honors pain without trying to patch it. Anjali once had a mentor who said, "You don't need the right words, you need the right presence." She had taken that to heart. Her patients didn't always thank her, didn't always improve quickly, but many came back. Because there aren't many places in the world where someone will sit with your brokenness without trying to sweep it away. She remembered an older woman once, widowed after 42 years. The woman cried for 45 minutes straight. Anjali didn't interrupt, didn't analyze, just handed her a tissue and stayed. At the end of the session, the woman whispered, "You're the only person who didn't tell me to be strong." Anjali said nothing, but later she wept, not from sadness, but from the honor of witnessing someone's unguarded truth. Therapists are trained to listen, but Anjali had learned to listen beneath the words, the tightening of a jaw, the hesitation before a name, the breath that catches after, "I'm fine." Sometimes her job wasn't to provide answers. It was to be the room where the storm could pass. She had a small bell on her desk, never rang it, just kept it there to remind herself, return to this moment, over and over. One evening, after a long day, she wrote in her journal, "People come in with tangled lives. I don't untangle them, I just hold the threads until they can begin to see the pattern." The boy in the blue hoodie came back the next week, and the next. He still didn't say much, but he sat and listened, and didn't flinch when she said his name. It was a start. And sometimes that is enough. He never spoke a word. Not to the monks, not to the villagers, not even when invited to tea by the abbot himself. He simply bowed and walked and bowed again. They called him the silent pilgrim. He had no belongings except a small cloth bag and thick wooden sandals worn smooth from years on the road. His face was weathered by wind and sun. His back slightly bent, not from age, but from reverence. Because every third step, he stopped, placed his palms together, and bowed to the earth. Step, step, bow, step, step, bow. He traveled like this for hundreds of miles, through rice paddies and dusty plains, through mountain passes and city streets, through cold rain, sharp sun, and falling snow. He never begged, never asked, never preached, only bowed. When he reached the gates of a remote temple high in the hills, a monk ran inside to announce, "The pilgrim has come." Curious, the monks gathered. Some stood with folded arms. Others watched from the steps. One scoffed, "What is this? A show?" Another whispered, "Surely he must be seeking merit or praise." But the abbot only smiled. "Wait. Watch." The pilgrim reached the stone path before the temple gate. Step, step, bow. His palms touched the gravel. His forehead met the earth. He rose slowly and continued. All morning he bowed up the path. By noon he had reached the courtyard. The air was silent, except for the soft crunch of gravel and the long breath between bows. Step, step, bow. By evening, he reached the base of the temple steps. He did not climb them. Instead, he bowed once more, then turned, and began his journey down the mountain. Step, step, bow. The monks were stunned. He never entered. He never asked to stay. He came all this way just to bow. The abbot nodded. And in bowing, he entered more deeply than any of us. This is the story of wordless devotion, of practice not performed, but lived in the marrow of each step. Commentary. In the West, we often think wisdom must be spoken. That truth arrives in grand lectures, eloquent teachings, powerful arguments. But sometimes the greatest teachings are silent. The silent pilgrim did not explain his path. He became it. With each bow, he gave himself to the moment, to humility, to gratitude, to presence. He bowed not to worship the earth, but to remember he belonged to it. In Buddhism, we bow not out of subservience. We bow to let go of the self, to surrender ego, to honor interbeing. The sky does not rise without the sun. The tree does not grow without the soil. You do not breathe without the generosity of everything around you. To bow is to remember that. The pilgrim didn't need a teacher. Every grain of dust was his teacher. Every blister, his scripture. Every bow, a verse in the sutra of the path. He asked for nothing, judged no one, corrected no teachings. He gave only his body, his time, his breath. That was his offering. That was his sermon. One monk, deeply moved, asked the abbot, "Should I walk like that? Bow like that?" The abbot said, "Not unless your heart is already bowing. It's not about copying the form. It's about sincerity. Some bow with their bodies and judge with their minds. Others bow with their actions and remain upright inside. But true bowing begins within. It is a quiet crumbling of pride, a surrender of the need to be seen, a softening into the now. There is a Zen phrase, "The great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences." The silent pilgrim had no preference for praise or obscurity, for arrival or delay. His goal was not the temple. His goal was the bow itself. Step, step, bow. Again and again, until there was no one left doing it. Only the gesture, only the giving, only the way. Wherever you are, whoever you are, you can bow too, not just with your body, but with how you listen, with how you wait, how you serve, how you show up for the dust on the floor or the silence in a friend's eyes. To bow is to soften, to slow, to remember what matters, and sometimes to say everything without a single word. The river was wide and still, glass-like beneath the pale morning sky. Mist hovered just above the surface, curling and drifting like breath from a sleeping world. A single heron stood motionless at the water's edge, waiting for the ripples to still. On the far bank, the Buddha walked slowly toward the shore. His robe was the color of earth after rain, simple, unstained. In his hand, he carried only his bowl, and in his eyes there was a depth that made even the wind seem to pause. The monks had already gathered beneath the Bodhi trees. Some sat cross-legged on dry leaves. Others stood in quiet reflection, watching the river. Today's teaching would not be long, nor loud, but it would be remembered. The Buddha stepped to the edge of the river and sat upon a low stone. The current moved slowly behind him, and in that quiet, he told a story. There was once a man, he said, who lived by a river much like this one. Every morning he bathed at dawn. Every evening he listened to the wind hum through the reeds. And one day, as he meditated near the shore, he saw a small boat drifting toward him. A few monks turned their heads toward the water as if expecting to see it. The boat was empty, the Buddha continued. No oars, no sail, just a simple wooden vessel carried by the current. The man smiled. There was peace in its stillness. No demands, no conversation, no self to disturb the quiet. But weeks later, the Buddha said, as he sat again near the water, another boat appeared. It drifted toward him, slow, gentle, and quiet as before. He raised his hand slowly, but this time there was a man in it. The listeners grew still, and as the boat drew closer, it veered slightly, striking the meditating man with a soft bump. The Buddha paused, and the man leapt up, furious. Some of the younger monks blinked. He shouted, the Buddha said. He scolded the other. He demanded to know why he had not steered, why he had disturbed his peace. There was a silence in the air now, a silence of recognition. But when the first boat struck him, when it was empty, he felt no anger. There was no one to blame, no insult to receive, no self to defend. He turned toward the water. Anger arises, he said, when we see another as the cause of our suffering, when we believe we have been wronged, when the self rises to declare, this should not have happened to me. The monks were very quiet now. But what if we saw all boats as empty? He asked. A breeze moved through the tall grasses. Somewhere, a bird called out once, then fell silent again. When another insults you, the Buddha said, they too are being carried by a current of pain, confusion, fear, conditioning. Just as the boat was moved by the river, they are moved by the winds of ignorance. He let the words settle. To shout at an empty boat, he said, is to shout at the river, to push the current with your hands, to exhaust yourself against what was never personal. A monk near the front, young, eager, lifted his gaze. His name was Tissa, and he had recently quarreled with another monk over the rules of chanting. Blessed One, he asked, but if someone harms us, deliberately, cruelly, is that not different than an empty boat? The Buddha nodded. Yes, intention matters, but even those who intend harm are caught in currents they do not fully see. He looked gently at Tissa. The man who lashes out is often protecting a wound. The woman who lies is often afraid. And when you react with anger, you are caught in your own boat, convinced it has a captain, steering by will. A senior monk, older with a weathered face and a calm demeanor, bowed slightly. I have learned, Lord, to hold my tongue, but the self still burns inside. I smile while feeling the fire of pride, of injury. The Buddha smiled gently. Then you have seen the fire. That is the first step. He reached down and picked up a small pebble. When a boat is struck, the water ripples, but it returns to stillness if we do not stir it further. He placed the stone down. Do not pretend there is no fire, but do not feed it. Watch it. Know its shape. See how it arises. And know this: it does not belong to you. The river flowed steadily behind them. A real boat now passed in the distance, its oars dipping quietly, evenly. You are not the boat, the Buddha said. You are not the current. You are not even the river. He looked to the horizon where the morning sun had begun to rise. You are the witness, the space through which all of it flows. A few monks closed their eyes. To let go of the self is not to disappear, he said. It is to stop clinging to what is not you, the story, the injury, the name Dot. He drew a shape in the sand beside him, an open circle. When you no longer need to be right, you listen differently. When you no longer need to be seen, you observe. When you let go of I and mine, peace is not something you chase, it is what remains. That night, as the wind cooled and the scent of lotus drifted on the breeze, the monks sat beside the river. Tissa approached the elder monk he had quarrelled with, bowed deeply, and said nothing. No apology, no defense, just the stillness of an empty boat. The elder bowed in return, and in that silence, something greater was restored. In the years that followed, the teaching of the empty boat would spread like a soft echo, across rivers, over mountains, into cities and quiet huts. Not as doctrine, but as insight. That much of what we suffer is born from the illusion of a fixed self. That the insult, the injustice, the anger are often just ripples in a river that does not know your name. And when you learn to see each passing vessel as empty, not meaningless but free of blame, then you too can drift more lightly. Letting go, not to vanish, but to float. Still, aware, unmoved by the waves of the world. Like the Buddha that morning by the river, watching everything and holding nothing. With each step on the Zen path, a new lesson unfolds. Now we turn to a story about recognition, of self, of others, and of what truly matters. Listen carefully to the next story. There was once a man who lived in poverty. His shoes were worn, his coat threadbare, his belly often empty, and his hands always calloused. But he had a friend, kind and wealthy, who loved him deeply. One day this friend came to visit. They shared a meal, laughed like children, and drank until the poor man fell asleep in contentment. Before leaving, the friend saw how hard the man's life had become. So he quietly took a jewel, a priceless, radiant stone, and stitched it inside the lining of the man's robe. He said nothing. He simply left the gift where it could not be lost. Years passed. The poor man wandered, worked, begged, slept beneath bridges and woke in alleyways. He remained convinced he had nothing, never knowing that a treasure was sewn into his own clothing. He suffered, all while wealth brushed against his ribs, all while forgetting what he already carried. Then one day the two friends met again, and when the rich man saw the state of his companion, he cried out, "Why have you lived this way? Don't you remember? I gave you everything. The jewel has been with you this whole time." The poor man froze. His hands trembled as he turned the robe inside out. And there, nestled in the seam, untouched and waiting, was the jewel. This is a parable from the Lotus Sutra, and it is not about wealth, it is about Buddha nature. It is about the truth we already carry, but forget. The man is all of us, wandering, doubting, working endlessly to find meaning, purpose, belonging, thinking we must earn it, thinking we must seek it, never realizing. We were born with the jewel. We never lacked it. We only forgot to look. Buddha nature is not something to gain. It is not granted to the worthy. It is already here, in the one who chants, in the one who steals, in the one who weeps in shame, in the one who laughs too loudly in the back of the zendo. The jewel shines equally. It does not discriminate. In Mahayana Buddhism, this parable is a teaching of Tathagata Garbha, the womb of Buddhahood. It means that all beings, no matter how lost, carry the seed of awakening, not as potential, but as reality. Already whole, already luminous, already stitched into the lining of our very being. The problem is not that we are broken. The problem is that we believe we are broken. And so we search, outside, in teachers, in techniques, in titles, in temporary comforts, all while the jewel sits quietly inside, waiting. There's a saying in Zen, don't seek the truth, only stop cherishing opinions. Because the more we chase, the farther we run from what is already still. In the story, the friend does not blame. He simply says, look. That is the role of the teacher, not to give you the jewel, but to remind you it's there, to show you the thread, to help you turn your robe inside out. Even your flaws are not flaws. They are fabric. Even your pain is not proof of lack. It is the tension in the thread that protects the jewel. Even your delusion is a path, if you let it lead you inward. The poor man's mistake wasn't laziness. It was forgetting his inheritance, just like us. We forget we are enough. We forget we are worthy. We forget that what we seek has always been with us. Buddhism is not about becoming holy. It is about remembering who you are, who you've always been, what cannot be taken from you, not by grief, not by failure, not by your own darkest thoughts. Sometimes people ask, but if I already have Buddha nature, why practice? And the answer is simple: to remember, to loosen the thread, to notice the glimmer, to stop walking past yourself like a stranger. Commentary: the jewel is not hard to find, but it is easy to overlook, because it does not shout. It does not sparkle in the usual light. It sits in the quietest part of you and waits for you to be still enough to feel it. You may not believe this yet. That's okay. Belief is not required. Only curiosity, only the courage to look inside the robe and ask, what if I am already whole? In a monastery garden, a novice once asked the teacher, where can I find the Buddha? The teacher pointed to the ground. Toes. Then to the novice's chest, heart. Then to the novice's eyes. Everywhere you see, but especially where you never thought to look. You have the jewel. So now, stop asking how to earn it. Start asking how to honor it. Live from it. Speak from it. Let it shape your steps. And when others forget their own jewels, remind them gently, just like the friend did. A monk once asked his teacher, "Master, where does the path to enlightenment begin?" The teacher did not answer. Instead, he stood up, walked across the room, and swept the floor. Later that night, the monk asked again, "Then where does it end?" The teacher looked up from pouring tea and said, "If it ends, it was never the way." This is the story of non-arrival, the path that unfolds not to get somewhere, but to be fully where you are. Long ago, in a forest monastery, a wandering monk arrived seeking answers. He had studied every scripture, debated with scholars, and meditated in caves for years. And yet, he felt restless, incomplete, as if truth always lived just beyond the next bend. He bowed to the abbot and said, "I have walked many roads. I seek the one that leads to awakening." The abbot nodded and replied, "Very well. Walk with me tomorrow at dawn." The next morning, they walked. Through bamboo groves, past quiet ponds, up rocky trails where mist clung to the earth like breath. They walked all day. The monk said little. By dusk, they had returned to where they started. The monk frowned. "You promised to show me the path." The abbot said, "I did. We walked it." The monk blinked. "But we arrived nowhere." The abbot smiled. "Exactly." The student wanted something linear, a goal, a peak. A moment where the sky split open and declared, "Here it is." But the Dharma is not a destination. It is the walking itself. It is the attention you give to each step, the space between one breath and the next. The Buddha did not climb a holy mountain to reach truth. He sat under a tree and stopped seeking. You do not become awake like winning a race. You remember the truth that was always here. Under the hurry, beneath the striving, inside the stillness of the now. When we think of progress, we think forward. Farther, better, beyond. But what if the path moves deeper, not farther? Inward, not onward. Like returning to the place you began, but seeing it clearly for the first time. The monk eventually understood. He stopped chasing high teachings, stopped measuring his worth by distance traveled. He began to walk slowly. He bowed to doorways, thanked his bowl before eating, washed his feet with care, and in those simple moments, something softened, something opened. There's a Zen saying, "Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water." The tasks do not change, but the one doing them no longer seeks to arrive. He is already home. In the end, the way is not mystical. It is making tea without rushing. It is folding robes with full attention. It is greeting the morning with breath instead of thought. And in those everyday movements, the path walks itself. The old abbot left behind a note before his passing. It read, "Those who hurry are carried by illusion. Those who walk with it vanish into the way." The monk later became a teacher. When asked by a student, "Where is the path?" he would only point at the floor beneath their feet. "Here," he'd say. "Now walk." So if you are still searching, still waiting to feel worthy, enlightened, or arrived, pause. Notice your breath. Feel your weight on the earth. Let this moment be enough, because Because the greatest truth? There is nowhere to get to. And still, you walk. Hospice is not loud. It hums like twilight. Low lights, quiet steps, gentle beeping. And in room 7, the breathing was slow. Draw in. Pause. Let go. Again, the man in the bed was old. Thin skin, tired eyes. Hands that had once built houses and held babies and shaken enemies' hands. Now they simply rested, still, soft, folded like leaves. Nora was his nurse, not young, not old. Calm eyes, a voice like warm water. She didn't rush, didn't flinch at grief. She moved like someone who had seen many endings and knew each one was different. This is not a story of drama. It's a story of breath, and the lesson it teaches when it leaves. The man, his name was Harold, had no visitors that week. His wife had passed years ago. Children scattered, caught in their own lives. Nora checked his vitals, fluffed his pillow, placed a cool cloth on his forehead. He looked at her once and said, "I'm afraid to let go." She didn't respond with philosophy, didn't offer reassurances. She just said, "Let's breathe together then." They sat in silence. Inhale, pause, exhale, again. Harold's breath was jagged at first, then smoother, then softer. He didn't need words. She didn't need noise. The Buddha once said, "As a flame blown out by the wind, so quiet is the mind of one who has understood." That night, Nora came back during her break, brought a small wooden statue, Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion. She set it by the window. "Just someone to keep you company," she whispered. Harold blinked in thanks. As the hours passed, his breath grew shallow. Draw in, pause, let go, and one moment. The pause lasted longer. Nora leaned in. Stillness, no panic, no alarm, just the hush of release. She sat beside him for a while after, not because it was protocol, but because endings deserve presence too. Later, she cleaned the room gently, changed the sheets, lit a small candle, and placed the statue back in her pocket. Another nurse asked her, "How do you do this every day? Doesn't it get heavy?" Nora smiled softly. "It's not about carrying. It's about letting go over and over until even the grief becomes quiet." People think death is about final moments, but in truth, it's about how you breathe until you no longer need to. Harold had taught her something, not in words, but in how he met the moment, afraid, then still, then gone. The next morning, Nora placed a sticky note in her locker. It read, "Let go like breath." Just a reminder of what Harold gave back to her. In this life, we inhale ambition, loss, joy, sorrow. We hold so tightly. But the final wisdom is the exhale, not to disappear, but to return everything we borrowed. As our exploration of Zen Buddhism deepens, let us listen to a story that reveals how true worth is often overlooked. Here starts the next story. There was once a garden behind a monastery. Not grand, not famous, just a quiet patch of earth behind the northern wall. Monks took turns tending it, pulling weeds, watering rows of vegetables, scattering herbs for bees. But there was one monk, young and full of questions, who never understood the point. His name was Anyo. He had come to the monastery seeking answers about karma, rebirth, and enlightenment, and all he seemed to be doing was weeding cabbages. One morning, he sat in the dirt beside the old gardener, Master Banzan, and asked, "Why am I here? I came to learn the truth of existence, not harvest radishes." Banzan didn't look up. He plucked a small stone from the soil and said, "Tell me, Anyo, do you know what kind of seed this is?" Anyo shook his head. Banzan smiled. "Neither do I, but we'll find out in time." Later that week, the master handed Anyo a pouch of seeds. "Plant these," he said, "just one each day." So Anyo did. One on Monday, one on Tuesday, one on Wednesday. By the second week, he asked, "What are they?" Banzan only replied, "Keep planting." Weeks passed. Shoots emerged. Some were thin and green, some strong and red-veined, some curled into spirals, others drooped under their own weight. Anyo began to notice which plants needed more water, which thrived in shade, which invited birds. He stopped asking what they were and started tending them for what they needed. By midsummer, the garden had transformed, not because of what Anyo had planted, but because of how he had planted. This is the story of karma as intention, how what we plant becomes our world. Commentary. We often think of karma as a great book in the sky, that someone somewhere is keeping score. But karma is not accounting, it's gardening. Every thought, word, and action is a seed. Some bloom quickly, some take years, some seem to disappear, only to sprout when the rains return. Anyo wanted to learn about karma, but he expected a scroll, a sermon, or a secret. Instead, he got a pouch of seeds. Because karma isn't something you learn, it's something you live. You discover it with every gesture, every tone in your voice, every time you choose to act with care or without it. Some people say, "But I didn't mean to hurt anyone." But even unintentional seeds grow. A sharp word, a careless gesture, a forgotten promise. Each one goes into the soil of the world. But so do quiet kindnesses. A bowl of warm rice, a door held open, a moment of patience with someone slower than you. These bloom too, even when you never see them again. Banzan once said to Anyo, "Don't ask what the seed will become. Ask what the soil needs today." That is the heart of intention. Not just what you do, but why. Karma begins not with action, but with intention. Even the Buddha said, "It is volition, monks, that I call karma. For having willed, one acts by body, speech, and mind." Years later, Anyo became a teacher. He no longer spoke of karma as fate. He taught his students how to garden their lives, how to pause before speaking, how to breathe before judging, how to water what they wish to grow, inside themselves and others. One student once asked him, "What is the best seed to plant?" Anyo smiled and said, "Attention to this moment and how you meet it." So the next time you move through your day, ask yourself, what am I planting and where? Because every moment is soil, and your attention is the seed. The Buddha sat beneath a sal tree where the light filtered through in flickering gold. The breeze played gently with the hem of his robe, and the scent of early jasmine lingered in the air. Around him, the monks gathered like ripples around a pebble dropped in a still pond. Quiet, present, steady. They bowed one by one and took their seats on the grass, robes the colour of ochre and clay. The forest around them hummed with life, birds calling from high branches, the distant crack of bamboo, and the low murmur of wind moving through tall grass. The Buddha's eyes remained half lowered, still and soft. Then from the circle, a young monk rose. He was thin, his frame taut with discipline, but his brow was furrowed, his lips pressed with quiet unrest. He stepped forward and bowed deeply. "Master," he said, "I have studied the teachings as best I can. I rise before dawn. I recite every sutra. I memorize every verse. I follow every precept. And still, I suffer. Still my mind is troubled. I fear I've become attached to the very teachings meant to free me." He hesitated. Am I clinging to the Dharma itself? The Buddha looked upon him gently. "You remind me of a traveller," he said. "Let me tell you a story." The monks settled deeper into stillness. The forest too seemed to pause. "There was once a man," the Buddha began, "wandering through a thick and treacherous forest. The trees were close, the thorns sharp. On all sides he was hemmed in by danger, wild beasts, hunger, cries in the distance that made his skin crawl. For hours, maybe days, he pushed forward, uncertain and afraid, until he came to a wide, roaring river. On the other side, he could see sunlight falling on an open path. He saw smoke curling from a distant hut. Safety, rest, the way forward. The Buddha paused, letting the image take shape. But there was no bridge, no boat. The current was fierce. He could not swim across without being swept away. So the man worked. He cut branches, wove reeds, bent saplings into shape. With patience, sweat, and determination, he fashioned a raft, just strong enough to carry him. He clutched it tightly, guided it across the swirling water. His heart pounded with fear, but he reached the far bank, soaked, trembling, but alive. The Buddha's eyes swept slowly across the circle of monks. "Now imagine," he continued, "that once on land, the man looked at the raft and said, 'This has saved me. This is precious. I will carry it with me always.' And so he lifted it onto his shoulders and continued his journey, the heavy wood digging into his back, slowing his steps, wearing him down." A faint rustle of recognition moved through the group. "Would that make sense?" the Buddha asked. The monks shook their heads. "Of course not," the Buddha said. "The raft served its purpose. It brought him across. To carry it afterward, to cling to it, would only bring suffering." He turned to the young monk. "So too with the Dharma." The monk blinked, uncertain. "But the teachings are sacred," he said. "Aren't they to be kept close? Aren't they the source of liberation?" The Buddha nodded. "They are sacred, but sacred does not mean permanent. The Dharma is not a cage. It is not a burden to be shouldered forever. It is a tool, a raft, a means to cross the river of confusion and craving. Once you have crossed, you need not drag the boat behind you." Another monk raised his hand. "Master," he asked softly, "what if one forgets or finds themselves back at the river?" Then rebuild the raft, said the Buddha. Relearn. Begin again. But never mistake the raft for the shore. The Dharma is not the destination. It is the guide. A hush followed, filled only by the hush of the wind and the rhythmic clicking of cicadas. Later that evening, as the sun descended behind the line of trees and turned the sky to a warm, bruised lavender, the monks returned to their huts, some with new questions, others with lighter hearts. But the young monk lingered. He wandered to the river near the monastery, where the water curled gently around stones and reeds. He sat on the bank, knees pulled in, and listened. The moon had begun its slow rise, casting silver light across the ripples. The monk breathed deeply. He thought of the teachings he had memorized, the sutras chanted, the rules obeyed, the rituals performed. Each had been a plank, a vine, a thread in the raft that carried him across his inner storm. He remembered the fear that had driven him to this path, the grief of his father's death, the anger he once held like a fire in his chest, the shame of worldly desire. Each teaching had helped him cross some inner current, but now, here he sat, dry but weary, clutching the raft as though it were still necessary. And he saw. He had carried not just the teachings, but his pride in them, his fear of failure, his guilt for each imperfect thought, his grasping for perfection, and all of these too were rafts, built to carry him through old pain, meant to be honored, yes, but then let go. He closed his eyes. The breeze shifted. The night deepened. By morning, he rose and returned to the Buddha. He bowed low, his hands open, his heart quiet. I have crossed, he said softly, and the Buddha replied, then walk freely. No further instruction, no ceremony. Just a smile, the kind that sees without needing to explain. Because truth, like a raft, is not meant to be worshipped. It is meant to be used, held for a time, then released. And so the monk walked on, not empty, but unburdened. He still chanted, still meditated, still studied the sutras. But now he did so not out of fear, not to be perfect, but because he understood their purpose. They were not chains, they were maps, and once you arrive, you do not need the map to breathe. Years later, when a new monk came with the same question, full of guilt, clinging to rules like a man clutching driftwood, he told him of the raft. He pointed to the river and smiled. There was once a dog who barked at everything, leaves in the wind, a child's laughter, the moon. He lived near the edge of a monastery in the countryside, a dusty patch of land behind the kitchen where scraps were tossed and shadows flickered on old stone walls. The monks called him Naga. No one knew where he came from. He was just always there. Tail curled, eyes sharp, teeth ready, and always barking. When visitors arrived, he barked. When bells rang, he barked. Even when nothing moved at all, he barked, as if the world itself was suspicious. Some monks avoided him. Too wild, they muttered. Others threw him bread or whispered mantras for his restless soul. But one monk, elderly, slow-moving, soft-spoken, began to sit near him each morning. No words, no food, just presence. He would settle into the grass, cross-legged, a few paces from Naga's resting place. He didn't reach for him, didn't scold the barking. He just sat. At first, Naga barked at him too, low growls, sharp yelps, but the monk remained still, breathing in, breathing out, no threat, no fear, no reaction. Days passed, then weeks. Naga still barked at others, still snarled at passing carts or fluttering robes, but not at the old monk. Eventually, when the monk arrived, Naga would simply lift his head and then rest it again. One morning, the monk placed a small bowl of water nearby. Naga didn't touch it, not for an hour, but as the sun climbed, he finally approached, drank, then sat beside the bowl. The monk said nothing, only smiled. A younger monk watching from the corridor asked later, "Master, how did you calm him? We've tried so many things, food, scolding, chants." The old monk replied, "He barked because the world barked back. He expected resistance, but when he found none, he started listening." Reactivity, the monk would later teach, is like a match near dry grass. One spark, and the fire spreads. But if the grass is damp, soft, grounded, the flame fizzles out. Naga still barked sometimes, but not with the same edge, not with the same fear. And when the old monk passed away years later, Naga lay beside his meditation cushion for 3 days, silent, not whimpering, not barking, just there. Monks and novices alike noticed. A dog who once barked at everything, now holding space for grief, with the stillness of a cloud. There is a saying, when you stop reacting, you start seeing. The dog had seen the one thing no command could teach, that peace isn't taught through force, but through presence that does not flinch. Continuing along the path of Zen insight, we pause now to hear a teaching about perception and hidden value. Listen carefully to the next story. Every morning at 6:15, she opened the curtains. The light crept in slowly, soft and golden, and the photo on the mantel caught it just right. It was old, sepia-toned, edges curled like leaves in autumn. A man in uniform, smiling, handsome, still young. Her husband, gone now for 17 years. Miriam never moved the photo. It stayed on the same spot. Third tile from the right, 2 inches from the lamp. She didn't talk to it, didn't cry over it. She simply saw it. Every day, grief for her had stopped being a storm. It had become weather, something you dress for, something you feel without needing to fight. Once, her granddaughter asked, "Why don't you get rid of that old photo? You have better ones on your phone." Miriam just smiled. That one isn't for looking. It's for remembering. Her husband had died in his sleep. No warnings, no pain, just silence. She found him in the morning, hands still curled as if holding a dream. She didn't scream, didn't collapse. She sat beside him, held his hand and whispered, "Thank you." People told her to be strong. She didn't try. She simply continued. At the temple nearby, the monks would speak of impermanence, of how everything changes, how attachment creates suffering. Miriam understood this. Not as an idea, but as a reality. She loved her husband deeply, but she did not clutch him. Even in his absence, she let him be gone. and in doing so, he never truly left. There's a Zen teaching. To hold a butterfly, you must open your palm. Miriam didn't keep a shrine, didn't tell his story over and over. She just lived in a way that would make him proud. She tended the garden they once planted together. She drank the coffee he used to brew. She folded his shirts one last time and gave them away. Not because she stopped loving him, but because she didn't want her love to become a cage. One day, a neighbor lost her husband. She came to Miriam, eyes red, voice shaking. "I don't know how to live without him." Miriam poured tea, sat with her, said nothing at first, then quietly offered, "You don't live without him. You live with the part of him that still breathes in you." The neighbor sobbed. And Miriam did not stop her. She just placed a hand on hers. And let it be. Love doesn't end. It changes shape. And grief, too, is a form of love. One that knows how to bow. Miriam is older now, hands soft with age. Memories flickering at the edges, but she still opens the curtains each morning. Still lets the light find the photo, not to bring him back, but to let him go again, gently, lovingly, without holding. It began in the hush before dawn, when the breath of the world still rested and time itself seemed unsure whether to move forward. In the palace of Kapilavastu, marble pillars loomed like frozen trees, casting long shadows across the corridors. Every corner, every curtain, every tapestry whispered of wealth and beauty. But the prince, Siddhartha, had stopped hearing the music in it. He had seen what no prince was meant to see. Old age, sickness, death, and a seeker who walked without fear. In the days that followed the four sights, Siddhartha moved through the palace like a man carrying a secret too heavy to name. He sat through the court banquets without appetite. He watched dancers move in silk, their feet light as feathers, but his thoughts moved heavier than stone. Yasodhara, his wife, had noticed his silence. She placed her hand gently over his, but it trembled. Rahula, their newborn son, reached for him with tiny fingers, but Siddhartha's eyes filled with both love and sorrow. He did not lack affection, he lacked answers. That night the moon hung low and golden in the sky, a silent witness to the choice being made within royal walls. The city of Kapilavastu lay sleeping, its gates shut, its guards at rest, its people dreaming of festivals and fortunes. But inside Siddhartha's chamber, there was no sleep. He stood over his son's cradle, his gaze long and quiet. Rahula stirred, then stilled again. Siddhartha touched the boy's cheek, memorizing the softness. A father's heart broke quietly inside him. A part of him longed to stay, to watch this child grow, to hold Yasodhara as the years passed. But another part of him, the deeper part, knew that to truly love them, he had to leave. Not for escape, not for abandonment, but to find an end to the suffering that would one day find them all. He crossed the chamber in silence, his footsteps bare. He passed the sleeping guards with a nod of gratitude. He paused once in the marble garden, where fountains trickled like stilled song. Stars wheeled above him in still constellations. Waiting at the outer gate was Channa, his loyal charioteer, and Kantaka, his white horse who had carried him through battles, festivals, and boyhood rides under open skies. Siddhartha took one last look at the palace that had been his whole world. Then he nodded. No orders, no drums, no farewell speech, just stillness and the beginning of something eternal. Channa led them through side streets. Siddhartha's cloak billowed slightly in the breeze, though the air was warm. As they neared the city gates, it is said the gods themselves descended to still the sound of hooves and hinges. The gatekeeper slept on, unaware that the one who was born to inherit the throne was walking away from it forever. Miles passed beneath them, past farmlands and shrines, past temples and banyan trees, and as dawn neared, they reached the forest's edge. There, beneath a fig tree bathed in pale starlight, Siddhartha dismounted. He stepped away from the saddle and removed his crown. It was heavy, not in gold but in memory. He untied his earrings and placed them gently in Channa's hands. Then, drawing his sword, he cut away his long, dark hair, symbol of his royalty, of his past. He let the strands fall into the wind. He removed his silken robes, folding them with reverence, and exchanged them for a simple cloth robe, earth-coloured and plain. Then he turned to Channa. "Take Kanthaka home," he said softly. "Tell my father I have not left in rebellion, but in search of that which is beyond birth and death." Channa's eyes filled with tears. "My lord, may I not follow you?" Siddhartha placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. "You will serve the Dharma more by returning than by following. Go. Tell them I am not lost. Tell them I am becoming." It is said that Kanthaka cried as he was led away. Some say the noble horse died of grief, his heart broken by parting. Others say his spirit was reborn among the stars. But Siddhartha did not look back. Barefoot, stripped of every title and comfort, he stepped into the forest. Birds stirred in the canopy. Mist hung low over the earth. The world ahead was wild and wide, but in that moment, he felt lighter than he ever had. No walls, no servants, no titles, just breathe, and the path. He walked deeper, alone, the forest accepting him without question. He drank from rivers, sat beneath trees, listened to wind move through leaves. He began to study with sages and ascetics, learning from their fire rituals and their breath practices, their renunciations and their silences. He fasted until his ribs showed like shadows. He sat still until ants walked over his knees. But in all this, he remained watchful. For he knew that extreme indulgence had not brought peace. And now he saw that extreme denial did not either. His journey would continue, but it had already begun. The great departure was not just a leaving, it was a shedding. Not just of privilege, but of illusion. The prince became a wanderer. The air became a seeker, and the world, though it did not know it yet, was about to change. Because one man had dared to step outside the gates and walk silently, humbly toward truth. One morning, as the temple bell echoed over the hills, a feather drifted across the gravel path. Software white, weightless. It twisted in the breeze, rising, falling, then gliding gently down near the feet of an old monk named Shiro. He stopped mid-step, not because the feather blocked his way, but because he had learned that even the smallest interruption might carry a lesson. He bent down, lifted it with 2 fingers, and held it up to the light. It was a simple thing, delicate, almost nothing, and yet it had travelled from some distant bird, perhaps one flying over the valley, or shaken loose in a morning preen. It had no wings, no voice, no will, yet here it was, resting, present, carried. That day during tea, Shiro spoke to the novices. He placed the feather on the center of the table. "Is this free?" he asked. The youngest tilted his head. "It floats on the wind, so—" "Yes?" Another frowned. "But it goes wherever the wind takes it. That's not freedom, it's powerlessness." A third sipped her tea and said nothing. Shiro smiled. "All three of you are correct," he said, "depending on how you define freedom." He continued, "Most people think freedom means control, to choose, to decide, to resist what moves us." He looked out the open window. "But the feather has no resistance, no plan, and yet it dances." The novices leaned in. He pointed toward the sky. "If the wind blew north, it went north. If the wind changed, so did the feather. But never once did it say, 'I failed.'" There was a pause. One novice finally asked, "Then what is the lesson, Master?" Shiro replied softly, "There are times to steer and times to yield." He picked up the feather again. True freedom is not always in direction, but in the way we ride the currents. Later that week, the temple cat fell ill. The novices fretted. One cried. Another tried to feed it broth. But Shiro simply sat beside it. He offered no solutions, no prayers, only presence. When the cat passed, Shiro gathered the novices. He did not speak of death, only of the wind. "You cannot hold the wind in your hands," he said, "but you can feel its path against your face." He paused. "And when it carries something away, you do not curse the air. You bow to its rhythm." The novices returned to their chores, softer now, quieter, less frantic in their attempts to fix what could not be fixed. One afternoon, as a storm gathered, a gust swept through the open courtyard. A lone feather rose from the steps, twirled, and vanished over the garden wall. Shiro saw it, smiled. He whispered, "Carried, yet free." There's a saying in Chan Buddhism: "The bird leaves no tracks in the sky. The wind leaves no footprints in the grass." The feather, like the mind, is most graceful when it stops fighting where it's going. As we drift deeper into the still waters of Zen, a quiet teaching begins to rise, one that speaks of clarity and of value not always seen. Listen gently now. The next story begins. The forest welcomed him, but not with comfort. It offered no shade from questions, no warmth from familiarity. Siddhartha had left behind the silk and gold of palace life, and now walked among wandering seekers, mendicants, and sages whose ribs showed like cages, and whose eyes glimmered with discipline or delusion. He sought teachers, and they welcomed him, for his mind was sharp and his determination pure. He studied with Arada Kalama, who taught of the formless meditative realms, places where consciousness floated like light on still water. Siddhartha followed his teachings, and with silent breath and sharpened focus, he reached those plains. His mind became spacious. His thoughts slowed like clouds drifting across a still lake. For hours, even days, he remained in deep absorption, untouched by fear, untouched by want. But when he opened his eyes, he saw the truth. Though his body was still, suffering had not ended. The world remained the same. Hunger still visited the poor. Age still bent the backs of farmers. Death still came to children and kings alike. He bowed to Arada Kalama with gratitude and moved on. Next, he studied with Udaka Ramaputta, who taught of neither perception nor non-perception, of the vast nothingness that lay beyond all forms. Siddhartha once again followed, and again he reached the heights. He learned to let go of sensation, of even the thought of self. He floated, as if beyond the skin of the world. But again, when his eyes opened, the truth remained. Desire still lingered. Aging still came. Death still waited. He thanked his teachers, bowed with reverence, and walked on. He had reached the highest peaks of mind. He had sat in the palace of consciousness. And still, he had not seen freedom. In a grove beside the Niranjana river, he found a band of 5 ascetics who practiced fierce austerity. They believed that the body must be conquered by pain, that by starving it, punishing it, mastering its cravings, one could burn away desire and illusion. Siddhartha joined them. He ate but 1 grain of rice a day. He chewed each grain for long minutes until it dissolved like a breath. He slept in the open, through storm and frost, curled against the roots of trees, his robe no thicker than air. He held his breath until his vision blurred and his head rang with wind. His limbs withered. His skin clung to his bones like silk over stone. His hair fell in clumps, and birds perched near him, thinking him a branch. He listened only to silence. He welcomed pain. He thought it would purify him, but the fire of truth did not rise. He could silence the body. He could silence even the mind, but the ache remained. The ache that asked, why do we suffer? Why do we cling? What ends the endless turning of sorrow? One day, as he bathed in the river, he collapsed from weakness. The water barely reached his knees, yet his strength failed him. His vision dimmed, the world tilted. A young girl named Sujata saw him and, moved by compassion, offered him a bowl of rice milk. Her hands trembled as she knelt before him, unsure if he was a spirit or a dying man. The milk was warm, the grains soft. As it passed his lips, his body stirred, not with indulgence, but with remembrance. The body was not the enemy, nor was the world. In that moment, clarity dawned. This was not failure, this was insight. Neither indulgence in luxury, nor torment of the flesh had freed him. He had lived both extremes. He had walked both shores, and both had kept him bound. He would walk the middle way, not soft and yielding, nor rigid and cruel, not drowned in pleasure, nor crushed by pain, but steady, balanced, awake. He stood and walked back to the grove. The 5 ascetics saw the softness in his step, the colour in his cheeks, and they scorned him. He has abandoned the path, they whispered. He has turned back to comfort. But Siddhartha knew better. He did not argue. He did not explain. He simply bowed and walked on. At the edge of the forest stood a great fig tree whose roots plunged deep and whose branches reached like arms toward the sky. Siddhartha looked upon it and knew, here he would sit, here he would wait. He gathered dry grass for a seat. He placed his back to the tree. He crossed his legs, rested his hands in his lap, and drew a deep, even breath. He made a vow, though my skin withers, Though my bones turn to dust, I will not rise from this seat until I find the end of suffering." The sun passed. The moon rose. Birds quieted. Winds stilled. And in the silence the battle began, not with sword or shield, but with doubt and memory, fear and illusion. But that was the next story. For now he sat, still, the seeker who had tasted every path, now ready to look within. The next chapter had begun. The sun hung low over the fields, casting long golden shadows across the dry earth. At the edge of a quiet village, 2 mango trees stood side by side. One was tall and strong, its branches heavy with fruit. Its golden mangoes glowed in the light, plump, sweet and fragrant. Children would stop and stare. Travelers paused to admire. Birds sang in its branches as if drawn to its beauty. The other tree was bare. Its bark was worn, its limbs crooked. It bore no fruit, and no one stopped beneath its shade. But this second tree, quiet, unnoticed, was the Buddha in one of his past lives. And this is the story of why he chose to remain fruitless, for the sake of something greater. Long ago the land had been wild. The forest grew thick around a small monastery where a humble sage lived with his disciples. He taught them to observe closely, to see not just what was obvious, but what was true. One morning, while walking through the woods, the sage turned to his students and pointed at 2 saplings growing side by side. "These trees," he said, "were born at the same time, but they will live very different lives." The students blinked. "They look the same," said one. The sage only smiled. "Wait." And the years passed. The first tree grew fast. Its branches stretched wide. Its roots drank deep from the stream nearby. And when its first mangoes came, the villagers discovered them. Sweet as honey, smooth as silk. They came in crowds. Children climbed its limbs. Merchants took its fruit to sell in town. Goats rubbed their backs against its bark. Travelers broke its twigs for kindling. Even the birds, once gentle, began to peck at its flowers for their scent. And still, the tree gave, but over time it began to lean. A branch cracked under a child's foot. Its roots loosened from the trampling of cattle. The fruit became harder to grow, and some seasons it had none at all. Still, the people came. The second tree grew quietly. It bore no fruit. No children climbed it. No travelers plucked its leaves. Birds rested gently in its shade but never stayed long. The villagers ignored it. But its bark stayed smooth. Its roots grew deep. Its trunk remained upright and still. And it watched. One summer, the king of the region came to the forest on retreat. He set up camp near the fruiting tree. His cooks, servants, and soldiers lounged beneath its shade, praising its sweetness. Then one of the ministers said, "If this tree has served so well, why not cut it down? The wood would make fine furniture. The fruit is nearly gone, but its trunk could be carved into chairs for your throne room." The king, intrigued, gave the order. And the next day, the great fruiting mango tree was felled. Its branches snapped, its trunk cracked open. Its roots, noble and deep, were torn from the earth, and all the forest fell silent. Later that week, the king walked through the woods again and saw the second tree, bare, small, and unremarkable. "What of that one?" he asked. His minister shrugged. No fruit, no use, not even shade. Let it be. And so it was spared. The sage, watching from a distance with his disciples, bowed slightly to the bare tree. "Do you see?" he said. "Sometimes what survives is not what shines the brightest, but what draws the least desire." The disciples looked at him with puzzled eyes. "But Master, was the fruiting tree not noble? Was its generosity not good?" "Yes," the sage said gently. "It lived a life of service, and that is honorable." He looked toward the bare tree, but this one made a choice, a quiet choice. It saw what happened to its brother, and though it too could have borne fruit, it chose not to, for the sake of survival, for stillness, for watching without being consumed. Many lifetimes later, the Buddha would recount this story to his own monks. He would say, "There are times to serve and times to endure. There is merit in offering yourself to the world, and wisdom in stepping back, not from fear, but from foresight." And the story passed through generations, told to children not to make them afraid of giving, but to teach discernment, to remind them that not all service must be seen, that sometimes quiet restraint is a form of compassion too, because the world will always chase what glows, but sometimes what glows too brightly gets torn down, and what stands quietly survives to keep teaching. It is said there was once a monk who lived alone in a crumbling hut on the edge of a forgotten village. His robes were patched, his alms bowl was cracked. His sandals made no sound on the stone path. He spoke little, taught no students, carried no scrolls. But people said strange things happened when they met him. A merchant who had been cruel to his workers walked by the hut and wept for no reason. A mother carrying grief for her lost child said the monk looked at her once, and the grief melted into the wind. When asked what he taught, the villagers would shrug and say, "He says only this: there is light, even in darkness." The hidden light. It is one of the most mysterious and profound teachings in Mahayana Buddhism, because it does not promise that suffering will end quickly. It does not say life will be easy. It says only, there is something in you, deeper than pain, stronger than shame, more real than your confusion. It is called Buddha nature, and it exists in all beings. Not just the gentle ones, not just the wise ones, but also in the angry man gripping the bar, in the prisoner lying in silence, in the girl who cuts herself and hides the blade, in the addict, in the abuser, in the one we condemn. The light does not go out. It can be buried, forgotten, covered in ash, but never extinguished. There's a story in the Mahayana scriptures. A group of disciples sat with the Buddha and asked, "Master, does everyone have Buddha nature?" And the Buddha said, "Even this dog has it." The disciples frowned. The dog scratched, barked, chased shadows. But the Buddha saw beyond behavior. He saw the seed, the stillness beneath the noise, the jewel in the dirt. Imagine a gold statue wrapped in rags, sealed in clay, buried for centuries. No one knows it's there, but if you chip away the layers, the gold shines. That is the self, not something to create, something to uncover. We live in a world that measures worth by action. We say, prove you're good, show you're worthy, earn your place. But the Dharma says, you are already whole. Now act in a way that honors that. There's another story. A monk once asked a teacher, if everyone has Buddha nature, why do they act with greed and hatred? The teacher pointed to a clear pool. He picked up a stick and stirred the mud at the bottom. The water turned cloudy. Is the clarity gone? The teacher asked. No, said the monk. It's just hidden. Exactly, the teacher replied. Wait long enough and it will return. The path, then, is not about becoming something new. It is about becoming familiar with what has always been true. About seeing through the layers. Not pushing them away, but noticing. This fear is a layer. This craving is a layer. This story I tell myself that I am broken, unworthy, lost, is a layer. And underneath, stillness, light. You. Some people fear this teaching. They say, if everyone has Buddha nature, what about evil? But Mahayana Buddhism does not excuse harm. It reveals the tragedy behind it. It says, this one too was once innocent. This one too has a light they forgot. This one too is capable of awakening. Not as an excuse, but as a possibility. When you see others through this lens, something shifts. The one who hurt you still hurt you. But now, they are more than that. You don't forgive because they deserve it. You forgive because you see clearly, because you do not want your own light dimmed by hatred, because you too want to be free. Commentary. To believe in Buddha nature is not to be naive. It is to have the deepest possible faith in what cannot be destroyed. Even by trauma, even by war, even by your own worst mistake. It is the faith that says, there is gold under the clay, even if I've forgotten it, even if no one else sees it, even if I don't yet know how to reach it. The monk in the crumbling hut. He had nothing, but he saw the light in everyone. And so people came, not to learn doctrine, but to be seen, to be reminded, to be held in the quiet truth that nothing in them was beyond repair. Maybe that's your task today, not to fix yourself, but to pause, to breathe, to ask, what if there's still light here? And then, to live from that place. Even if no one else understands. Even if the robe still feels heavy. Because the moment you remember, you become the reminder. With each breath, we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen, where the smallest stone may hold the greatest truth. Here starts the next story. He sat at the back of the community hall, near the exit. Not hiding, just watching. The others talked, laughed, poured coffee from large silver thermoses and passed around paper cookies from supermarket trays. But he didn't move, didn't smile, didn't speak, just watched. His name was Curtis. Army jacket, grey beard, hands that twitched slightly even when still. He had come to the meditation group because his VA counselor suggested it. You don't have to talk, she said. Just show up. So he did, and for 6 weeks, he said nothing. But he returned. Same chair, same silence, same eyes that carried too many memories to speak aloud. The teacher never pressed. A woman in her 50s with a quiet strength. She guided them through breath awareness, walking meditations, and loving kindness phrases that sometimes made people cry without knowing why. Curtis never joined the group circle, never chanted, but he always listened. This is not a story about what was said. It's a story about the space that held what could not be said. One evening, during a guided meditation, the teacher said, "Imagine someone you've never forgiven. Now imagine letting go, not for them, but for your own peace." Curtis's jaw clenched. His breathing grew sharp. Then it softened. After the session, he didn't leave right away. He walked slowly to the window, looked out at the parking lot lights reflected in puddles, and whispered, "I used to listen for footsteps every night." The teacher said nothing, just turned to stand beside him. Curtis continued, eyes still out the window. "In Iraq, we slept light. One sound, just one, meant someone might die. When I came home, the silence felt louder than the gunfire." She nodded, not with pity, but with understanding. "The breath," she said softly, "is where the past visits, but does not have to stay." Curtis nodded once, not to agree, but to acknowledge. In Buddhism, there's a concept called the middle way. Not indulgence, not denial, just being with what is without running or pushing. Curtis didn't heal overnight. There was no miracle. But he started walking more, started breathing deeper, started sitting with his pain instead of being swallowed by it. And slowly, the silence became less sharp. One night after the group had left, he stayed behind. He rolled up the mats, wiped the floor with quiet care, turned off the lights, and before he left, he bowed. No one saw it, no one needed to. There's a koan that says, "Show me your original face, the one you had before the world told you who to be." Curtis was learning to meet that face again. Not as a soldier, not as a broken man, but as someone who could sit with sorrow without becoming it. One evening, a new veteran came to the group. Stiff posture, uneasy eyes. Curtis noticed. After the session, he walked over and offered a single sentence. "Don't worry, you don't have to say anything." Then he sat down beside him, and they watched the rain together. Healing isn't loud. It's not sudden. Sometimes it sounds like silence learning to be gentle. A monk once traveled alone through a deep forest. He'd been walking for days, through mud, through heat, through cold rain. He carried nothing but a worn robe, a begging bowl, and a satchel with a single stone inside. Why the stone? He could not say, only that a teacher once gave it to him and said, "Carry this until you understand its weight." The monk took it literally, and dutifully he carried the stone. At first, it seemed like nothing, but as the months passed, over hills, across rivers, through deserts, it began to burden him. His back ached, his hands calloused, his mind grew resentful. "Why must I carry this?" he muttered one evening, dropping beside a creek. He looked at the stone, round, dark, unremarkable. A simple weight, and yet it had become everything. That night, he slept beneath the stars, and he dreamed. In the dream, he stood in an endless field beneath a vast open sky. He held the stone tightly, afraid to drop it, afraid he might lose something important. Then a voice, calm and distant, whispered, "Are you carrying the stone, or is the stone carrying you?" He awoke just before dawn, heart racing. The sky above him was pale and soft, wide and light. He looked at the stone again and understood. This is the story of thoughts, identity, and the illusion of burdens, how what we cling to becomes our weight. Commentary. Many of us carry stones, regret, shame, an old story someone once told us about who we are, a wound we've wrapped ourselves around for so long it feels like identity. We think we're being strong, but strength is not clinging. It's knowing when to let go. The monk carried the stone because he trusted his teacher. But trust without inquiry is like walking in darkness without asking if there's a door. His real practice began not when he received the stone, but when he questioned it. The Buddha taught that suffering arises from attachment, even to things that seem noble, tradition, memory, belief, self-image. We say this is who I am, but who is saying it? And what happens when the self no longer fits? The stone was not the problem. The gripping was. The fear of what it meant to be without it. We carry pain from the past because we think dropping it means forgetting. We carry roles that no longer serve us because we think they are us. We carry anger because we think it protects us. But a clenched fist cannot hold the sky. Later that day, the monk stood on a hilltop and watched the clouds pass. He held the stone in both hands, not angrily, not resentfully, just with awareness, and then he set it gently on the ground, not thrown, not discarded, just returned. A breeze touched his robe. The clouds shifted. He took his next step, and it felt like the first. In that moment, he realized the sky had always been there, unbothered, unburdened, vast, and that somewhere along the way, he had confused being grounded with being weighed down. This is the nature of the mind. It can be like a stone, heavy, fixated, stuck in the past, or like the sky, open, vast, always able to hold the weather without becoming it. The monk never told others to drop their stones. He simply told this story and ended it with a question. What are you carrying that is carrying you? So, pause today. Look gently at the weight in your hands, your heart, your mind, and ask yourself, do I still need this to walk? Or have I mistaken the stone for my path? The full moon rose slowly over the temple pond. Its pale light spilled across the stone paths, kissed the tips of bamboo leaves, and finally rested on the water surface. Perfect, round, and still. A quiet hush fell over the garden. Even the crickets seemed to pause. It was as if the world had stopped breathing, just long enough to notice the moon. But what the monks gathered around the pond saw was not the real moon. It was only a reflection. A novice named Kaoru sat cross-legged near the water's edge. She had come to meditate, but found herself staring at the luminous circle. It shimmered with every ripple. It danced when the breeze blew. It fractured into 1,000 pieces when a frog leapt across. And yet, when the pond stilled again, there it was, whole, unmoved, unaffected. The head monk, Master Renji, approached quietly. He sat beside her without a word. For a while they both watched. Finally, Kaoru whispered, "It looks so real." Renji nodded. "It does." She tilted her head. But it's not. It's just light. Renji smiled. Is your reflection in the mirror not you? Kaoru hesitated. I don't know. It looks like me, but it's not me. Then what is it? He asked. A copy, she guessed. Renji turned to her. And what is your idea of yourself? She blinked. A reflection. Renji picked up a small stone. He held it above the pond, then let it fall. Plop. The moon shattered again. 1,000 tiny moons danced outward on the ripples. Does the moon mind? He asked. Kaoru laughed softly. No. Does the moon change? No, she said again. Renji looked at her gently. Then let your mind be the sky, not the water. The moon is always whole, whether you see it clearly or not. That night, Kaoru wrote in her journal, I chase shadows. I polish reflections. I mistake the moon in the water for the truth. The next morning, during temple chores, Kaoru knocked over a bowl. It shattered. Clay and rice spilled across the floor. She gasped. But instead of panic, she remembered the moon. A fellow novice scolded her. She bowed, cleaned the mess. Inside, she felt no shame. Only the quiet smile of someone who had seen a truth. Weeks later, a guest philosopher visited the temple. He asked the monks, what is real? Some spoke of emptiness, others of causes and conditions. One offered the Heart Sutra. But when the question came to Kaoru, she said, the moon and the water. She explained, the moon is reality. The water is our mind. When our mind is still, reality reflects clearly. When disturbed, the image breaks, but not the truth. The philosopher nodded slowly. That is poetic, but how do you know it's true? Kaoru looked up. Because when I stop chasing the reflection, I feel the light on my face. That night, Master Renji shared a final koan with the gathered monks. A monk asked, Master, what is enlightenment? The master pointed to the moon in the sky. Then he pointed to the moon in the water. Then he smiled. No answer, no explanation, just two moons. And the silence between them. There is a saying in Zen, do not mistake the finger pointing to the moon for the moon itself. And so the teachings end where they began, with a reflection, a still pond, a moon that never moved, and a student who finally stopped looking for herself in the ripples. The path of Zen unfolds like morning mist, soft and patient. In this next tale, we are invited to see, beyond appearance, into essence. Listen carefully to the next story. The tree stood at the edge of the world. Its roots gripped the earth like memory. Its branches reached toward the sky like longing, and beneath it sat a man, still as a mountain, breathing, watching, waiting. His name had once been Siddhartha, but that name now lay behind him, like a robe folded and left at the forest's edge. He had left palaces, left hunger, left both indulgence and denial. And now, with the moon rising above the horizon and the world softening into dusk, he sat beneath the Bodhi tree, not in search, but in surrender. His legs were crossed, his hands rested lightly in his lap. The breath moved through him like wind through reeds, slow, even, empty of grasping. He had made a vow, though my skin withers, though my bones turn to dust, I will not rise from this seat until I see clearly, until I find the end of suffering. And so the night began. The stars emerged like scattered seeds across the dark. The forest exhaled. Animals stirred. The air cooled. Siddhartha's mind turned inward, like a lamp flame drawing into itself. He began to see, not with eyes, but with knowing. Visions came, clear, unforced, as if someone were whispering his past to him, life by life. He saw himself born in countless forms, as man, as woman, as child, as beast, as merchant, as slave, as prince, as pauper, each life blooming and withering, each desire rising and fading, each birth followed by loss. He saw himself die 1,000 deaths, not with fear, but with clarity, and for the first time he understood. The self is not fixed. It moves, it changes, it clings, it returns. He watched the thread of his existence unspool across time, and yet something beyond the thread remained still. He did not speak, he did not stir, but inside him, a door creaked open, and he stepped through. Midnight deepened. The forest held its breath. The moon climbed higher, softening the world in silver. Now he turned his gaze outward, not with judgment, but with compassion. He saw the lives of others, their births and deaths, their joys and sorrows, rising and falling like waves. He saw kings and criminals, lovers and thieves, monks and warriors, all bound by the same law, karma, intentions like seeds, actions like water, and from them the fruits of joy or suffering. He saw that no life stood alone. Each was a thread in a vast net. Each thought, each choice, each word sent ripples outward, reaching far beyond the speaker, the thinker, the doer. He saw how hatred returned as hatred, how greed bore more hunger, how ignorance looped endlessly like a wheel spinning in sand. And he saw too how kindness softened sorrow, how generosity opened hearts, how truth, spoken gently, could shatter lifetimes of illusion. And still he sat, breathing, watching. The net of becoming stretched before him, vast, intricate, impossible to escape. Unless one saw the threads for what they were, not chains, but illusions. He closed his eyes, and the world began to tremble. The deepest hour of night, not even owls cried now, not even leaves moved, and within him, the final door unlocked. He turned his mind to the cause of suffering. Why do we suffer? Why do we cling? Why do we fear? And the answer rose, not like thunder, but like morning, clear, simple, radiant. He saw it all in a single breath. Ignorance gives rise to craving. Craving gives rise to clinging. Clinging leads to becoming. Becoming to birth. Birth to sorrow, decay, and death. And so the wheel turns. Again and again. But he also saw how it could be stopped. Not with violence, not with denial, but with clarity. With the eightfold path. Like stepping stones across a great river. Right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. He saw that suffering was not a punishment, nor a curse, nor a mystery. It was a path, and paths could be walked, and walked until they ended. And as the final shadow lifted from his mind, as the first bird stirred in the distant branches, it happened, not a flash, not a voice, not a miracle, but a knowing, a deep, still knowing. He had awoken. The sun crested the hills, slow and golden. The mist curled like incense through the trees. And Siddhartha, now the Buddha, opened his eyes. He looked out over the world, not with desire, not with fear, but with compassion so vast it had no name. He saw children born into love and hunger. He saw soldiers sharpening swords. He saw merchants counting coins. He saw mothers weeping over small graves. And he wept, not with sadness, but with tenderness, because they were all still sleeping, not foolish, not broken, just dreaming. He had been asleep once too, and now he was awake. It is said that Mara, the Lord of Illusion, came one last time, not with armies, not with demons, but with a whisper. Now that you are free, he said, leave them behind. They will not understand. They will mock you. They will twist your words. They will forget. And the Buddha listened. He sat with that thought, the thought of peace in solitude, of disappearing into the forest, of vanishing beyond suffering alone. But then he saw a farmer rising to begin the day. He saw a child carrying water. He saw a girl humming a tune she did not know was ancient, and he knew they were not lost, just tired, just waiting, just needing someone to show them the way back to themselves. So he turned to Mara and said, "They will understand. Some will. Even one is enough." And Mara vanished. He stood slowly, the grass beneath him still wet with dew. His knees ached, but his heart did not. He took his bowl, his robe, his breath, and began to walk toward the village, toward the people, toward the long road of teaching. He would speak not of gods, nor of punishments, nor of sacred fire, but of suffering, and how to end it, of breath, and how to follow it, of kindness, and how to live it. And so the man who once left his son sleeping, who had starved beneath trees, who had faced demons and silence and the unraveling of self, walked down from the Bodhi tree. And the world, though it did not know it yet, had already begun to wake. Because one man had seen clearly, had sat still, had not run, and had touched the truth. And from that stillness, a path was born for all the world to walk. The midday sun beat down on the monastery grounds, turning the stone paths warm beneath bare feet. A hush lingered under the mango trees, broken only by the soft sweep of a broom or the distant cry of a myna bird. Somewhere in the distance, a pot clinked gently on a wash stone. It was the kind of afternoon that invited stillness. Under the spreading shade of a sala tree, the Buddha sat. His robes were folded neatly, his spine straight yet effortless. His gaze lowered, not in sleep or withdrawal, but in alert peace, like the surface of a quiet pond. From the southern walkway came Malanka, a young monk with a troubled brow. He had once been praised for his intellect, admired for the sharpness of his reasoning. But in recent months, that sharpness had turned inward. Each meditation left him with more questions than silence. He dreamed of stars, of time looping backward, of endless rebirths and impossible beginnings. He had filled scrolls with inquiries. He debated with scholars until his throat ached. But peace never came. And so today, he came to the Buddha. He bowed low. "Blessed One," he said, "I have questions." The Buddha did not speak immediately, but his silence was not dismissive. It was a space, an invitation. Malunka hesitated, then stepped forward. "Is the universe eternal?" he asked. "Is it infinite? Will a Buddha exist after death or vanish like smoke? Is the soul bound or free? Is the world self-created or born of design?" Each question emerged like a stone cast into a well, sharp, fast, echoing. The Buddha remained quiet. Malunka's face tightened. "Why will you not answer me?" he asked. "Are these not worthy questions? Are we not seekers of truth?" The Buddha looked up. His gaze was soft but steady. The other monks nearby paused in their work and drew closer, sensing the moment. The Buddha spoke. "Let me tell you a story. There was once a man," he said, "who was struck by a poisoned arrow in battle. The wound was deep. The poison spread quickly. His friends and family rushed to bring a healer. But the man, gasping, objected. "Before I allow treatment," he said, "I must know who shot me. Was he a nobleman or a laborer? What was his clan? Where was he born? What kind of bow did he use? Long or short? What wood was it carved from? What was the arrow's length? The feathers? Were they peacock or eagle? What poison did he use, and who taught him?" The monks chuckled, some hiding smiles behind folded hands. But the Buddha's gaze didn't waver. While the man demanded these answers, he died. He turned fully toward Malunka. "Would you call that man wise?" Malunka lowered his head, chastened. "No, Blessed One." The Buddha continued, his voice like slow water. "We are each struck by the arrow of suffering, pain, aging, death. The urgent question is not what lies beyond the river, but how to stop the bleeding, how to live with clarity now. We must remove the arrow before the poison spreads too far." Malunka stood in stillness. The breeze lifted the hem of his robe. His hands, once clenched, softened at his sides. "But don't those other questions matter?" he asked. "Aren't they part of the path?" "They may," the Buddha said, "but only after the wound is tended. Theories are branches, but we must first tend to the root. The Dharma is not meant to entertain the mind, it is meant to free it." The young monk exhaled. For years he had studied commentaries, argued with visiting teachers, sought certainty in logic and definition. But now he saw the arrow was still in him, and each speculative thought, each metaphysical obsession, had only twisted it deeper. That night, Malunka did not return to the library. He sat by the monastery's stone well and watched the moon ripple in the water. He did not write. He did not speak. He simply breathed, slowly, honestly. For the first time, he noticed the weight in his chest, not as a puzzle, but as pain. In the morning, he returned to the Buddha. He bowed deeply, forehead touching earth. "Blessed One," he said, "I no longer ask if the universe is eternal. I ask how to meet this moment without fear." The Buddha smiled. That is the first step. And from that moment forward, Malunka's practice changed. He spoke less, listened more. When new monks asked abstract questions, he did not dismiss them. He simply asked, "Is this question healing you or delaying your healing?" Word of the exchange traveled. Soon, the story of the poisoned arrow spread, not as a rebuke of knowledge, but as a reminder of urgency. In a village struck by drought, a farmer mourned his ruined fields. His hands trembled with anger. "Why has fate cursed me?" he asked his neighbors. "Why was I born here and not in richer soil? Who sinned in a past life to bring this?" But then he remembered the story of the arrow. He sat beneath his withered tree and whispered, "How can I help my family now?" And the answer came quietly, "Begin digging a well." In a riverside town, a mother wept for her daughter, taken by fever. She begged the heavens for a sign, wondered what sins she had committed, questioned every past decision. But the village priest, who had once trained as a monk, told her the story. That night, she held her daughter's shawl and lit a lamp in silence, not to understand fate, but to honor love. Elsewhere, a scholar stood before a crowd, reciting theories about the soul's origin and whether consciousness survives death. In the back row, a quiet boy raised his hand. "Sir," he asked, "have you removed your arrow yet?" The crowd fell still. The scholar did not answer. He returned to his room that night and sat without books for the first time in years. The Buddha never forbade questions. He welcomed inquiry. But he offered a compass, not a cage. He simply asked, "Will this question free you? Or bind you? Will it heal your wound? Or distract you from the blade still buried?" That became the measure. And so the monks learned not just what to ask, but when to ask and why, because the arrow is real. The pain is now. The wound is not a theory, and the first task, before philosophy, before argument, before metaphysics, is to pull it out, not later, not after you name the wood, not once you've traced its lineage, but now. There was once a kingdom where wisdom was prized like gold. Rulers held counsel with monks. Children learned not only how to count, but how to think. And among its most respected voices was a wandering teacher known simply as the Buddha. He did not wear jewels, he did not shout, but when he spoke, even the birds seemed to pause. And one day, in the town square of a village nestled near the banks of the Ganges, he told a story. Not to entertain, but to reveal. The dispute began with laughter, then sharp words. A group of scholars, each confident in his own tradition, had come to debate. Some were Brahmins, others were ascetics. A few belonged to newer sects, filled with fiery conviction and scrolls still smelling of fresh ink. They spoke of truth, of soul, of self, of afterlife, of permanence, of nothingness. Each man insisted his view was the whole, complete, correct. The others, misguided, foolish, dangerous. They argued beneath a fig tree, loud enough that passers-by turned to look. A merchant chuckled, a potter shook his head, a child pointed and whispered, "They sound like crows fighting over the same grain." When the Buddha arrived, he did not interrupt. He simply sat and waited until their voices began to falter, some from exhaustion, some from shame. And into that space, He placed his voice like a drop of water on a still pond. "There was once a king," the Buddha began, "who summoned 6 men born blind since birth." The scholars fell quiet. The king told them, "I will allow you to encounter something magnificent. Tell me what it is." The blind men were curious, eager. They were led one by one to a massive animal they had never known, a mighty elephant. Each man was guided to touch a different part. The first reached out and felt the flank. He pressed his palms against its broad, warm side and declared, "Ah, an elephant is like a wall, wide and unmoving." The second grasped the tusk, smooth and curved like polished stone. "No, no," he said. "An elephant is like a spear, sharp and strong." The third took hold of the trunk, which coiled and shifted in his arms. "You're both wrong. It is like a snake, alive, twisting, breathing." The fourth felt the knee, round and solid. "Clearly, it is like a tree trunk," he announced, "thick and rooted." The fifth wrapped his hands around the ear, which flapped gently like a fan. "You are mistaken. An elephant is a large fan, waving back and forth." The last man touched the tail, thin and rope-like. No, it's a rope. A coarse, swaying rope." When they were brought back together, the king asked, "Well, what is an elephant?" And the shouting began. Each man insisted he was right. Each accused the others of ignorance. Each swore he had touched the truth with his own hands. And in a way, they had. The Buddha paused. The scholars sat frozen, the parable hanging in the air like incense smoke. Each man, he said, encountered only a part. Each was sincere, each described what he felt, and yet none saw the whole. He looked at each scholar now, gently, without judgment. "So it is with many truths. You may touch a piece and call it the whole, but when clinging to fragments, conflict follows." One of the younger scholars frowned. "But teacher," he said slowly, "does that mean there is no truth?" The Buddha smiled, not to mock, but to soften. "Number, it means that truth is vast, and the mind must be vast to hold it. One who sees the trunk and believes it is a snake is not lying, but he is also not seeing clearly." Another monk, one who had remained quiet through the debate, bowed. "And what, Blessed One, is the way to see the whole?" The Buddha turned his palm upward, a gesture of openness. "Humility, listening, letting go of the need to be right. When you stop clinging to your peace, you make space for someone else's. And in that space, something greater may arise." The fig tree rustled gently above them. A breeze passed through the square. The tension had broken. One of the elders leaned forward. His voice was softer now. "I have spent my life defending what I thought was the whole elephant, but now I wonder if I have only touched the tail." The Buddha nodded. "Then you are further along the path than many who still cling to the tusk." That night, as lamps flickered in the homes of the village, the story travelled from mouth to mouth. Children reenacted the blind men, bumping into trees and miming trunks and tails. Elders sat in circles, wondering what part they had touched in their own lives, what truths they had guarded too tightly. And in one small home, a young girl asked her grandmother, What does the whole elephant look like? The old woman smiled. We may never know for sure, she said. But if we all share what we felt, maybe we can come closer. And so, the parable of the blind men and the elephant was passed on, not as a warning against belief, but as an invitation to perspective, to listen, to learn, to let go of the walls we build around our understanding. Centuries later, the story would still be told, in temples, in schools, in circles of debate and doubt. And always, it would whisper the same truth. No one sees everything, but together we can see more. In the hush of understanding, Zen offers us another glimpse of what it means to recognize worth not by weight or shine, but by presence. Here starts the next story. There was once a tree that stood just beyond the monastery walls, a tall maple. Its leaves flamed gold each autumn, spilling light into the courtyard like scattered coins. Monks often paused beneath it, bowing to its stillness, especially when the season turned. One afternoon in early autumn, a young novice sat beneath the tree troubled. His master had given him a koan to meditate on. What do you cling to that no longer lives? He had meditated, chanted, even fasted, but the answer would not come. That day, the wind had begun its long conversation with the branches. A single leaf, amber at the edges, twirled down, landed softly in the novice's lap. He stared at it. Fragile, veined, no longer green, still beautiful, but no longer living. The tree gave no sign of loss. No grief, no clinging, only release. Another leaf drifted down, then another. The novice looked up. The tree was letting go of what had once been its crowning glory. Not with sorrow, but with grace. Later, he spoke with his master. Why does the tree drop what once gave it life? The master replied, because it trusts the cycle. It knows spring will come again. It makes room by releasing. The novice thought of the things he had held too tightly, a grudge from a harsh word, a dream that had withered, an idea of who he should become. He returned to the tree the next day, sat beneath it again. This time, when a leaf fell into his hand, he whispered, "Thank you," and let it go. That night, he wrote in his journal, "Letting go is not loss, it is returning." As the days grew colder, the tree became bare. Some monks said it looked lonely, exposed, but the novice saw strength in that nakedness, a kind of quiet surrender. It was not clinging to what had passed. It was preparing for what would come. Winter arrived. Snow dusted the monastery roofs. The tree stood still, unmoving, uncovered, unconcerned. Months passed, and then, one morning in spring, the novice awoke to find tiny buds on the tree's limbs, software green, new. He smiled and understood at last. What we release returns, but only when we've stopped grasping. There is a phrase in Buddhist teaching, you can't receive with a closed hand. The tree had shown this truth. Letting go is not the end. It is the opening. It happened in the monastery courtyard. A cat had wandered in from the fields, slim, white-pawed, with eyes like river stones. The novices argued over it. "Let it stay," said one group. It brings joy. We feed it. It purrs. It lives among us." "No," said the other group. "It distracts us during zazen. It chases the sparrows. It has no place in a temple of silence." The voices rose. One claimed compassion. Another claimed discipline. Both believed they were right, but neither listened. And so they argued, loudly, endlessly, until the abbot, Master Nansen, appeared. He said nothing at first. He looked at the cat, then at the monks, then back at the cat. In one swift motion, he drew his blade from beneath his robe, held it high, and said, "If any of you can say a true word, this cat will be spared." Silence. No one spoke. The wind stirred. The cat blinked, and then the blade flashed, and the cat was gone. That is the story, told for centuries across temples and texts, debated, feared, questioned, but never forgotten. Later that evening, Master Nansen told the story to Yoshu, his senior student. Joshu did not argue. He did not recoil. He simply took off his sandals, placed them on his head, and walked out of the room. Nansen smiled. "If you had been there," he said, "the cat would have lived." What does it mean? Why such violence? Why the silence? Why would a master of compassion raise a blade? And why was Yoshu's nonsense, putting sandals on his head? The answer Nansen was waiting for. This is not a story about a cat. It is a story about attachment to views, about how quickly the mind clings to being right, how debates, even over seemingly noble things like kindness or rules, can become distractions. The monks thought they were arguing about the cat, but really, they were arguing from ego, from the illusion of my view versus yours. And Nansen saw it, in their noise, in their stubbornness, in their refusal to let go. He saw a sickness, and he responded not with teaching, not with reasoning, but with cutting. In Zen, cutting is not always physical. It is the sudden strike that breaks the mind free from duality. It is the moment the raft is kicked away, because it's become another attachment. It is the sharpness that leads to stillness, like a thunderclap that silences thought. Like a stone thrown into still water, breaking the surface so deeply that the ripples stop altogether. The blade in this story is not just steel. It is a mirror, and what it reflects is uncomfortable. Because the cat is not just a cat. It is that which we cling to while pretending to care. It is the debate that becomes a disguise for control. It is the idea of rightness that replaces actual presence. When Nansen raised the sword and said, "Say a true word," he wasn't asking for logic. He wasn't asking for poetry. He was asking for being, for someone to drop the debate, to step beyond language, to show life, not defend it. No one spoke. Not because they didn't know the answer, but because they were still stuck in thinking, still stuck in sides, still holding on. But Joshu, when he heard the story, he didn't try to argue it. He didn't try to defend the monks or condemn the master. He didn't even say a word. He simply placed his sandals, dusty, humble, ordinary, on his head, and walked out. Nonsense? Perhaps, or perhaps, a true word without speech. A gesture so absurd that it shattered meaning altogether. No logic, no stance. just presence breaking form, just action beyond thought, just emptiness wearing a shoe. Nansen smiled, because truth had finally moved. Not in words, not in argument, but in surrender, commentary. This koan disturbs many, because it seems violent. But Zen does not condone cruelty. It uses imagery not to glorify pain, but to jolt the mind awake. The cat is not the victim. The cat is everything we refuse to let go of while pretending we've let go. Your opinions, your need to win, your identification with spiritual knowledge. The cat is the argument that's gone on too long. The debate over kindness that's become unkind. The need to control the uncontrollable. And Nansen sees that no answer can reach those trapped in duality. Only a cut. Only a break. Only a moment so sharp that the mind has no time to resist. Zen is not safe. Not because it is cruel, but because it does not protect your illusions. It won't nod along to your spiritual ego. It won't politely entertain your ideas about Zen. It will instead hold up the blade, not to harm you, but to cut away what you're not, so that what remains is true. You cannot think your way out of illusion. Sometimes you have to shock yourself awake, to see the cat, to see the blade, to see the silence after both are gone, and then to walk out of the room with sandals on your head. Because in that moment, nothing makes sense. And finally, you begin to see, at the edge of a temple, near the foot of a quiet hill, there lay a stone basin. It had no inscription, no offerings placed before it, no tourists gathered around, but every monk in the monastery knew its story. And when a novice was struggling, that's where the teacher would send them. Go sit by the broken bowl, they'd say, and that was enough. Long ago, the bowl had been whole, carved from a single piece of granite, smooth, strong, revered. It stood in the center of the temple courtyard, used for rituals and alms. Every morning it was filled with clear water. Every evening it was emptied and washed. Then came a winter earthquake. Not violent, but enough. A hairline fracture. Then a second quake weeks later, and the bowl split down the middle, cracked clean through. It no longer held water. Some said to discard it. Others wanted to repair it. But the abbot, an old woman with kind eyes and a quiet presence, said, "Leave it as it is, let it teach." And so it remained. Years passed. Moss gathered inside the broken seam. Rain pooled only briefly before slipping through the gap. The bowl no longer functioned, but it was not discarded, because in stillness, it began to reveal something else. Monks would sit beside it, touch the cool edge, trace the break with reverent fingers, and slowly, quietly begin to understand. Wholeness does not mean unbroken. The world teaches us to fear breaking, to grieve what cannot be fixed, to measure our worth by our usefulness. But the Dharma invites a deeper seeing, a truth whispered by that silent stone. You are not what you hold. You are what you are. Even when you hold nothing at all. The broken bowl was no longer useful, but it was still itself, still stone, still shaped by care, still part of the temple. Its crack did not remove its belonging. One day, a monk sat beside it, after losing his voice. He had been a teacher, a singer of chants. Now, silent, he felt useless, forgotten. Until the abbot brought him to the bowl and simply said, "It doesn't hold water, but it still holds truth." And then she bowed. This is the parable of function and form. So often, we confuse our value with our utility. We think, I can't do what I used to. I've lost my role. I am broken. But even a bowl that no longer holds water can still hold presence, still offer reflection, still rest in the sun, still teach. In Buddhism, there is a phrase, form is emptiness, and emptiness is form. It appears in the Heart Sutra, one of the most profound teachings. On the surface, it sounds like a riddle, but it points to this: what you are is not just your shape, and what breaks doesn't define what remains. Imagine your roles are bowls: parent, artist, teacher, helper, listener. When one cracks, you may feel like you've lost something essential, but you haven't lost you. You are still present, still capable of love, still part of the whole, just as the broken bowl is still part of the temple. One evening, a novice accidentally dropped a cup. It shattered. He looked up in fear, but the teacher only said, "It was already broken." The boy's eyes filled with confusion. The teacher continued, "Everything we use is already broken. We just don't see it yet, so we love it while we have it. And when it breaks, we bow. To live with this awareness is not to be gloomy. It is to be free, to care for things deeply, but not cling to them desperately. To understand that even in brokenness, there can be peace." Commentary. The broken bowl reminds us that identity is not function, that worth is not erased by loss, that something can be cracked and still belong, still matter, still offer presence. There is a time to serve, and there is a time to simply be, to be still, to be soft, to be a presence others can sit beside. Like the bowl, like the monk with no voice, like the abbot who teaches with silence. You are not just the things you do. You are not just the roles you fill. You are not just the tasks you complete. When those fall away, when something cracks, what's left? That's the real practice. That's the part of you that watches, that breathes, that remains. Sit beside your own cracked places, not to fix, but to witness. Let them speak. Let them soften you. Let them remind you that even broken things reflect the sky. Even a bowl that holds no water can hold the Dharma. As the lantern of awareness glows a little brighter, we come to a tale about seeing with more than the eyes. Let the stillness guide you now, and listen carefully to the next story.